I am Ivan Kalmar from the Department of Anthropology, and I'd like to thank all those who have made his visit to the university possible. The sponsors of this event include my own Department of Anthropology, and I'd like to particularly welcome anthropology alumni who are here with us tonight. Other sponsors are the Departments of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations and of Religious Studies, and the U of T Multi-Faith Center. We've received important support from Victoria University and its components Victoria College and Emmanuel College. For Emmanuel, sponsoring Professor Ramadan's lecture is part of its ongoing efforts to expand Muslim studies at the university, as seen in the new Emmanuel College Muslim Studies program. I need also to thank our enthusiastic and efficient team of student volunteers, too many to name, but special thanks must go to the head of the volunteer team, Bushra Patel. I need to thank the Muslim Students Association for all their other support as well. And last but not least, my gratitude goes out to Omri Greenberg, who has helped to organize every aspect of Professor Ramadan's visit. Tariq Ramadan is Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at St. Anthony's College, Oxford, and also teaches in the Oxford Faculty of Theology. He is visiting professor at the Faculty of Islamic Studies in Qatar and the University of Malaysia, Perlis, Senior Research Fellow at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan, and Director of the Research Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics in Doha, Qatar. He is the author of a large number of works, some of which will be available for purchase after the lecture. His recent books include Islam and the Arab Awakening, The Arab Awakening, Islam and the New Middle East, The Quest for Meaning, Developing a Philosophy of Pluralism, What I Believe, and Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we've been receiving a tremendous response to this lecture, and we had to stop registration after a very short time. I'm sure that we could have filled Convocation Hall if we had wanted to. The tremendous interest among the university public attests to the impact that Professor Ramadan has had on how we view one of the most pressing issues of the day, the role of Islam in the West and across the globe. Like many of you, I find Professor Ramadan's work not only intellectually stimulating, but also inspiring. For Tariq, Ramadan professes tirelessly that the search for truth must, especially today, be informed by and intertwined with not just the tolerance, but the love of our neighbor, the other. Tonight, we're looking forward to Professor Ramadan's lecture entitled Towards a Shared Contemporary Applied Ethics, An Islamic Perspective. Professor Ramadan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivan, for this introduction, this invitation for the university, for you and the students who are involved in this invitation. I'm visiting Toronto almost every year, at least once, and I think it has been a long time since I came here for a university meeting and lecture, and it's important for me to share with you on the topic that has been chosen this evening around ethics and the shared understanding and in which way we can work, coming from an Islamic perspective, but also dealing with contemporary challenges. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here. I'm just arriving, by the way, just a few hours ago. I just arrived from Europe, so if it's not straight to the point, be kind with me anyway. Let me start with an introduction and three main points when it comes to ethics and why I think it's important, the concept of shared. It's important when it comes to values and when it comes to norms and when it comes to our understanding. In the book, The Quest for Meaning, I allocated one chapter on the notion of ethics for two reasons. First, because we don't agree among the philosophers, we don't agree about the definition and even the source of what we call ethics. And the second is, when you speak Arabic and you come from the Islamic tradition, which is not the only language which you can have a problem, but the concept of ethics, when it is translated into Arabic, or from Arabic the concept of akhlaq, it is not exactly ethics coming from the Greek tradition. So we have a problem of definition. It is important to start with this. I can give you an example in the center that I'm chairing in Qatar about Islamic legislation and ethics. The first session that we had was on bioethics with 4 scholars of the text and 4 scholars of the context, and we were challenging, a specific issue with Bichon from Georgetown University and scholars coming from the Muslim background. And it was quite clear that from the beginning there was something which was not clear about the topic, what was the topic. And the perception for scholars is, when it comes to ethics, we talk about the behavior of people, which is not exactly what we are talking about. So what I mean by ethics here, just to be clear, and you can get a sense of the whole discussion when it comes to ethics. The first problem that we have is there a difference between morality and ethics? And Paul Ricoeur, trying to summarize the whole discussion in the Western philosophical tradition, was saying that what we can agree upon is morality is coming mainly from a top-down understanding, mainly from the religious field, while ethics was understood by the philosophers as something which is coming from the common intellectual production. So it's the common rationality. By the way, not all the philosophers agree on this, and the first is the Protestant tradition saying, no, there is a Protestant ethics and the Christian ethics, and I'm talking about Islamic ethics. So what is important for me is first to say morality is coming from the Roman, from the Latin, and ethics is coming from the Greek. So I'm not making a difference as to this understanding, even though if we come to the philosophical discussion, there is this discussion that the way we were dealing with morality is, or it's coming from the religious tradition, while it's the same word. In fact, when we talk about ethics, we are talking about what is right and what is good and what is bad. And the ethical, the Greek tradition was mainly, and the way we were using the concept from ethics was the common rationality. And my main point is this one, is that when we come to the philosophical tradition, we'll find that on this first, there is an overlapping dimension coming from rationality and coming from the scriptural sources. So we need to solve the problem first. Are we talking about something which is coming only from rationality, or are we talking about something which is coming from scriptural sources? And if it's coming from scriptural sources, what is the relationship between the scriptural sources and common rationality? And this is where we are going to talk about the shared understanding and the shared potential definition and implementation. Second thing which is important when it comes to ethics, and it's already in what I have been saying right now, is we can't talk about anything which has to do with an ethical perspective if we don't start talking about the concept of human being. And very often when we have interfaith dialogue or dialogue between philosophical traditions with atheists, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and Hindus and others, there is something that is missing in our understanding. It's as if we think that we agree on what a human being is, which is wrong. We don't. And the very essence of if you have an understanding, it's a very simple thing, but it's important, between the three monotheistic traditions. If you start by thinking about human being from a perspective that could be, for example, the Rousseauist tradition saying human beings by definition are good, is the social relationship that make them bad. Or Hobbes saying, no, that's the opposite. Human beings are by definition bad, and they are trying to be better. But at the end, they will never be really better, because they are bad. And if you come from the Christian tradition and with the diversity of interpretations of what is the original sin, is something which also has to do with human being. If by definition you come with an understanding that there is something in the human being which is bad, which is directed towards sin first, and then you have this is part of the nature after the fall, this is also a way you deal with it. Now come to the Greek tradition with Socrates. When, for example, he's talking about the soul and he's talking about the body. If you listen and you try to understand carefully, there is something which is the soul, because of its origin, is good. The body, because of its origin, is potentially bad. And it's because the soul is entrapped into the body that the soul can lose the first ideal dimension coming from the world of ideas and the world of the great values. So this jailed soul is losing its definition, its essence, while trapped in the body. But it means, in fact, in moral terms, that you are qualifying the body and you are qualifying the soul. So it's a concept of human being that we have to discuss. Now, if you come to the Islamic tradition, we don't have this, and it's very close to the Jewish tradition on this, which is not exactly this. It's not that the soul is morally qualified per se, or the body morally qualified per se. It's not the soul which is good and the body which is wrong or bad. It's the way you are going to deal with the body and the way you are going to deal with the soul. In the Islamic tradition, the soul could be bad. In النفس لأمارة بالسوء means the soul could be bad. And it's through an educative process, is when you are conscious of your soul and try to make it good, that you can have a good concept of human beings. So the moral qualification is never on things and elements. It's on action and behavior. So the body per se, it's not bad. It's not the moral qualification. So I think that here, we may agree or not, but we need to have this kind of discussion, which is missing today in our interfaith dialogue. We talk about at the periphery of our traditions, not from the center. And you know, it's not only a theological discussion, but it's also the way you deal with philosophical tradition, as I mentioned right now, the Greek tradition. So now if we come to definitions, we see that we have a problem when we have to define. When we talk about the concept of human beings, we understand that we might have to take this into account and to try to get a better understanding of what we are talking about when it comes to ethics and applied ethics. And then, as I said, the last big discussion and great discussion which is necessary is, as I said at the beginning, is the sources of ethics when it comes to the way we deal with our contemporary world. At the end of the day, in the name of what? What is the justification for you to say to something, no, I can't do it. I can't make that. I can't do this. This is wrong. What is the source of your reference here? And this is where, once again, we come back to the big question about the relationship between faith and reason. So is it rational? Is it a religious take? And why do you say no to things? And why do you say no to some behavior? So these are questions that are coming out of this discussion. Now let me come to the Islamic perspective on this, because I think that if we come to the shared dimension on ethics, it's important to understand that our shared universality doesn't mean that we are forgetting where we are coming from. So the universal cannot erase or deny the fact that we are all coming from a particular background, and you have to be clear on this. I really have a problem with this kind of people from the Islamic perspective, or from the Western perspective, or from the Christian, Jewish, or whatever, claiming that their values are universal and in fact taking over. It's just a power struggle. Once I was talking to, it's normal for someone who is coming from a rational background, a Jewish background, Christian or Muslim background, say, okay, I think my values are universal. Of course you think so. Of course. If not, what is the point of being a believer? But the point is, how do you talk about the universal? It's important. And this is why, once again, in the book, The Quest for Meaning, I'm using the image of the metaphor of the mountain, that there are many roots and that at the top we can share. But don't look at the mountain from the top. Look at the mountain from the valley, meaning that have an intellectual modesty and humility when it comes to, okay, there are many roots coming to the top. Because if you put yourself from the top, you are looking at the mountain from the side of God. And you say, okay, that's my universal, and it's the universal. The only universal I know is the shared universal, is the top accepting, acknowledging the fact that there are many roots coming to this. But still, how do you explain your roots? How are you going to translate this into something which is understandable for other traditions? Because the point that you have a specific root doesn't mean that it's not explainable. It has to be. So the shared universal should make every one of us ready to explain her or his specific roots. This is why it's a shared universal. Because if you come from nowhere and you come straight to the top, that's not going to make interface and diversity possible in our daily life. And this is why, for many Western Muslims, my problem with them today is you don't explain your roots. You are not explaining your path. You are coming with values, you say these are the Islamic values, and then it's as if it's less rational or reasonable or rational than any other tradition. And in fact, the problem with the Islamic tradition today in the West is to translate this, being faithful to the core and the heart of the Islamic tradition, is to make it understandable for people. Means you have first to get an overall understanding of the Islamic message, get the translation, the words, because it's coming from the Arabic. So the way we translate Arabic words and terminology into English or Western languages, this is critical. And then to do this, having in mind that you come from somewhere, but you talk to people coming from somewhere else. So in order to translate who you are or from where you come, it's important to understand who they are and from where they come, and which is sometimes a gap in our dialogue. So the first thing which is important, and by the way, this is not to say that it was not there in the West. You know, when we heard the Pope Benedict XVI saying once in Europe, and when he talked to Europeans, he talked to Canadians and to the West, saying that the roots of Europe are Greek and Christian. He is doing something here which is problematic. Because I can understand, and I said this, we had a dialogue 2 years ago in Rome, I can understand that there is a fear of the Muslim presence in the West, because it's as if they are practicing and present. That's fine. I don't have a problem with fear. I have a problem when fears are translating and reassessing the past in a way which is not right. It's not true. The roots of Europe are not only Greek and Christians, and first, you can't avoid talking about the Jewish tradition first. And then the Islamic tradition are part of the European conscience and the European legacy. This is the starting point. You cannot, because you are scared of the present, reduce the past. So my take on this is sometimes when we talk about what we are talking about here, about ethics, it's quite interesting not only to study philosophy, but to study history. Because there is a lack of memory in the way we deal with our own values. And there is a dark hole in our memory. It's as if the Jewish tradition, now the Jewish tradition after the Second World War was integrated with it. Because in fact, the way you deal with the past is always also a way you deal with the other. By saying us in the narrative, we say who is in and who is out. So when you say us, the Judeo-Christian tradition, it means that others are not in. While I think it to come to the past, you understand that that's not true. I'm saying this because the dialogue that is needed today in our Western countries and around the world has also to do with the ideological use of history. The way we are neglecting some contributions and part of the construction of the Western identity, the European identity, as well as the North American identity. In many ways, not only with Islam, but this is just a revealing process. When it comes to the Islamic perspective now and our understanding of ethics, what is essential in the Islamic tradition is that first, the concept of human being, as I said, is we don't qualify elements, we qualify behavior. And this is coming from the scriptural source, the Quran, saying, in fact, your soul and your body are going to be morally what you are going to do out of them. Is the way you behave. So it has to do with your conscience. And your conscience and your intellect are going to be driven or influenced or nurtured or educated by two sources. The first is rationality. So there is, from the very essence of the Islamic tradition, something which is trusting the human rationality. And it's because there is a trust in the human rationality that there is revelation. If there is no revelation, there is no trust in human rationality. Why? Because to get the very meaning of the revelation, you need a mind to read it. So very often in the scriptural sources you have Ya ulul albab, or who are full of insight, and the people who are understanding and they are thinking. So the very essence of Islam, and this is why if you look at the Islamic tradition from the very beginning, we didn't have at the beginning of the Islamic tradition, of the Islamic history, something which was be cautious with rationality. It came afterward. But at the beginning is our rationality is the element that is making us human beings. And then through this rationality and this conscience, you have to educate yourself. And this is the very meaning of the first word that was revealed in the Quran, اقرأ باسم ربك. Read in the name of God. Read means read the world and read the scriptures. So read means you have to understand. You have to get this understanding. Now, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 12th century. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, you don't know much about him. And in fact, if you are true to the Western rational or rationalist tradition, anyone who knows about Descartes and doesn't know about Ghazali has something which is missing in his culture or her culture. Have you heard about Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 12th century? In fact, we know now that René Descartes, the French philosopher, who was at the beginning, and not the only one, but at the beginning of what was called in the 17th century, the rationalist tradition in philosophy. In fact, he read Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and he had something which was written on the margin of one of the books. And Abu Hamid al-Ghazali is the one in one of the critical work, a book that you have it now in English, is Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. It's the reference from darkness. a book where he is talking about the relationship between the scriptures, the intellect, and doubt. He's talking about doubt. And in fact, he is putting doubt as a necessary step to get knowledge and to go towards the revelation. And saying there is a gap between the revelation and the doubt and the intellect, but we need this to get to understand faith. And in fact, he's constructing something which is essential, is the relationship between faith and reason. And in another book, it's not a book, it's volumes called Ihya Ulumuddin, Revivification of his Religious Sciences. He's writing something which is important when it comes to revelation. He said, the book is an outward revelation. Your intellect is an inward revelation. Meaning, in fact, your intellect can produce values, norms, and principles. And the scriptural sources are coming to do this as well. So, in fact, the scriptures are talking to your mind is understanding the scriptures, and the two are sources of morality and ethics. So it means that you are not going to find everything in the book, but the book is the light, the mind is the means. But the means could be the source. You get that? This is the starting point of his understanding of the relationship between intellect, doubt, and faith. Exactly what you will find in the Descartes tradition. So the hypertrophic doubt and all this tradition, it's not coming from someone who was alone thinking in France or in the Netherlands. It's coming from a dialogue between traditions. But it's as if all this dialogue was completely neglected in our history of philosophy. In fact, you can get a PhD in philosophy, you don't know anything about the Jewish and the Christian and the Jewish and the Muslim traditions. It's as if they don't exist. And I think that here, it's in the Islamic tradition, something which is important is when it comes to ethics, the two sources of ethics are the scriptural sources and the human intellect. In fact, something that you will find also in a very interesting book that was written at the beginning of the 20th century by Henri Bergson, Les deux sources de la morale et de la religion, the two sources of morality and religions. And he's talking about this the process of religion and societies. But in this, it's important that we'll find that in the very old mainstream Islamic tradition, we have this relationship between faith and reason as the two main sources. Faith means, I believe that this book is coming from God. This is what I mean by this. And it means that if you think that this book is coming from God, the book is going to give you some principles. But there is another dimension also, which is when you put the book and when you put the reason, there is a third dimension that is not very often talked about, but it's very critical in the mystical tradition, in the Sufi tradition. And the most important traditions in Islam that produce ethics, in fact, is the mystical tradition, or the Sufi. Why? Because in al-Akhlaq, they were always saying, there is no rule, never, without a spiritual meaning. And the spiritual meaning has to always to do with al-akhlaq, which is in fact the good behavior. It's so much the case that you come to one Islamic tradition where it is said, when the messenger said once, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, I was sent but to complete the good behavior. In fact, the essence of his mission is the good behavior. So you pray, you fast, whatever you do in your life, at the end, the parameter is your behavior. And your behavior is not the outward behavior. It's how much you are at peace with yourself, within. And the starting point is self-justice, is to be just with your own self. So here, it's not enough, in fact, in the Islamic tradition. And anyone who is dealing with the Jewish tradition and the Kabbalah and the Christian mystical tradition and the Buddhist tradition will see something which is important here, which has to do, the source is the text, the rational or the intellect, the rational source, but also your heart. as something which is the spiritual dimension. Why? Because your heart understands as much as your mind understands, not the same way, not with the same light, with the same in-depth. I'm saying this because in the mystical tradition, you will see that from the very beginning there is something which has to do with this understanding that everything in Islam is about ethics. And the starting point is the relationship between your heart and your ethical behavior. This is the connection. So you can see I'm very deep in the Islamic tradition, but anyone who has studied the other traditions, and I talk to a Buddhist, I talk to a Jew, I talk to a Christian, I say, it rings a bell. I understand what you mean. And why? Because this is where our wording, the way things should be reconstructed in our understanding of ourselves, it's important to get this, to get at the center. But when you come to your center, you should not lose sight of the centers of others, the way they are using the words, the way you are understanding their own universal reference. So this is one dimension. Now the second dimension when it comes to, so I spoke about the concept of human being, the second is faith, reason, and heart. And the last dimension that I want to tackle here is a relationship which is very important. And in this, the Islamic tradition is very much in between the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. And in fact, all together in the light also of the Greek tradition and the Western philosophical tradition. And I don't have time to do this now, but I would say that the one who is exposing this in the best way, I talked about it once again in the book, The Quest for Meaning, is Hegel. Because Hegel is, before Marx, coming with a sense of history, but the way he is dealing with universal values, the way he's dealing with the spirit in history is something which is very, very interesting when you understand the monotheistic tradition, the Jewish as much as the Christian, and because he didn't talk about this. You know, what is interesting with the Hegel understanding of everything is double, itself and something else, doesn't work in Arabic because you don't have the verb being, to be. It's not in Arabic. When you speak in Arabic, you go beyond. Anyway, that's another story. But what I wanted to say here is he is the one who might be the most interesting, very complex, very difficult to read, but very deep to expose or to present this relationship between the three dimensions. On one point is the legal dimension. When it comes to ethics and when it comes to the legal tradition, normally what we expect is the norms, the ethical norms, to be translated into the legal framework in one way or in another. In fact, law should be the translation of norms for our living together in the way we deal with an organized society. So there is something which has to do with the legal dimension. And if you come to the Islamic tradition, this is where the problem could raise, because, and it is now the problem. The first Islamic science is not theology. And by the way, even if you read the book Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, I'm challenging the fact that we can speak so easily about it in Islamic theology. Because very often what you say about God can be said only because this is what he's saying about himself. It's not a human construct. But this is another discussion. It's, when it comes to the first Islamic science, we deal with law and jurisprudence, what is known in Arabic as al-fiqh. And we have to be very cautious with this, because very often Muslims, when they speak in English, they say fiqh is jurisprudence. That's not true. Fiqh is the legal system plus jurisprudence, meaning the way we deal with new challenges. But it's law. It's the human translation of law in our contemporary world. I'm saying this because often Muslims are coming with a very simplistic definition of two terms, is to say Sharia is law, fiqh is jurisprudence. No. Sharia is law for jurists. They are reducing Sharia into law because this is their job. This is what they are. But Sharia is the way for mystics. Sharia is the way for human beings. Sharia is much more open than this. It's not the legal dimension. Sharia is the way towards faithfulness, much more than only the legal framework. And anyone who is coming with a very simplistic definition of Sharia, this is God's law, no. And the problem that we have here is that the Muslims themselves, they don't translate the concepts in the right way. They very quickly take what is said by some Orientalists or by a very narrow understanding of Islam. Some traditions, the literalists, are coming sometimes with very narrow understanding. And you know what I said, by the way, just I want to make this clear in academic terms. What I said about faith, rationality, and heart. Be careful. This is not representing all the Muslim traditions. We have literalists, they would say, never. The only source of morality is the text. The literalists are saying this. So I want you to make it clear that when I'm talking about the mainstream, I'm not talking about everyone. I would have even some Muslims, literalist Muslims, who would say what you said now is putting you outside Islam. So to talk about, I'm not using the concept of orthodox, I'm talking about the concept of mainstream, the majority, from the Shia and the Sunni tradition. But we have to be clear. This is not representing all the Muslims. This is not the only understanding. Now, what I am saying is that the first science is Islamic law and jurisprudence. And in fact, it's what? It's to determine what is permissible and what is not. What we have in Arabic is al-halal wal-haram. It's the licit and the illicit. So this is the framework that we have, and this was the first. Why? It was, in fact, the direct translation of the legal framework into our life. And the scholars, very quickly, they said there are two sets of legal references. When it comes to our relationship with God, our creed, al-aqidah, and when it comes to the way we pray, the way we fast, is al-ibadat, the rituals, you can do but what is written. Listen to this. Now you are going to get me right if you understand what I said at the beginning. The two sources can be the intellect and the scriptural sources. They would say there is one field, the only reference when it comes to what is right and permissible is the texts. Is when we talk about our creed, the 6 pillars of faith, and the 5 pillars of our practices, our rituals, the way we pray, the way we fast, the way we have to give zakat, the social purifying tax, and the way we perform the pilgrimage. You do here only what is written. So if you want to tell me, no, you can pray like this, say no, give me a text showing me how I can pray. Now there is another category which has to do with social affairs, what is known in Arabic mu'amalat. And here you can do whatever you want except if there is a text telling you you can't. It's exactly the other methodology. Here you do but what is written. Here your rationality is open. Do whatever you want, but if there is a text telling you you don't do this, you can't. I give you an example. You know that there is a text telling you you can't drink alcohol. So this is the mainstream unanimous position. I know that I heard some saying if you travel to the West you can. So the pick and choose tradition exists, but that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, you can't. But when you arrive in Canada and you are in this country, you have all these drinks. Everything is possible except alcohol. You understand? It's very simple. It means the permission is open except with what is prohibited. And it's like this with everything. What you do with drinks, you can do it with everything, as long as you don't have a text. So you understand here that you can't just rely on the text if you want to deal with ethics in that field. You have to make your mind. You have to think about the objectives. So in this, when it comes to the Islamic legal tradition here, we have two methodologies and two ways of dealing with ethical ground. There is one field, we are not going to discuss it because it's as it is written, and we are not going to change that. Now there is a field here when we need to come with, when we deal with the legal framework. And what the scholars were trying to do is, how am I going to deal with limits? And in fact, 4 elements are important. The first is one they read within the text with a prohibition. So, for example, we cannot drink alcohol. What does it mean when we are going to deal with things that were not written in the Quran and the scriptural sources? Smoking, for example. So to get an understanding, a response on smoking, you have to come back to why, for example, we have some prohibitions on some way of dealing with, drinking, and then the scholars were trying to get the very meaning of the law, of al-hukm, or of the way we deal with the prohibition. And in fact, they went to 4 elements. The first is, behind a prohibition there is what we call a illa, which is a raison d'être. Why? Because there is a reason for that. So you need to try to get the reason. Why do you don't drink? Because you are losing your mind, because in excess this is bad, and you have it even in the Quran. Excess of drinking is not good for you, so avoid it. So we have a raison d'être. So it's not good for your health, it's not good for your intellect. By analogy, if you go to smoking, it's not in the text, but you are going to say, okay, to smoke, it's not good for your health, and it's not good for your pocket. Because you are putting money to destroy your health, while other people are not having enough money just to eat. In ethical terms, you have an answer here by analogy.